What's up everybody, this is Jose from Southern Life, and on today's video I'm going to let you guys know exactly where the damages were from Hurricane Ian. Then we're going to hop into Marco Island, Naples, Bonita Springs, Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, Fort Myers, Bokeelia, Boca Grande, Port Charlotte, Northport, Englewood, Venice, and Arcadia, and show you guys exactly which areas had damage. You can actually see satellite imagery that was taken right after the hurricane. We're going to start on the southernmost inhabited place in Southwest Florida, Chokoloskee. The Smallwood store is here. This is a historic site in Southwest Florida. As you can see, people in Chokoloskee parked their boats and their RVs on top of this mound to keep it from being washed away. There were no wind damages on this island of Chokoloskee, the southernmost inhabited place in Southwest Florida, but the storm surge did actually come up pretty high. However, most of Chokoloskee is on a mound, and the damages were mostly related to storm surge Everglades City, which is just outside of Chokoloskee. Damages from storm surge. You can actually see boats here and docks that were removed. This area suffered storm surge damages, as you can see by the disarray of the boat docks, but there were no considerable wind damages here, only damages due to storm surge. In this area of the Port of the Isles, you can see that extensive amount of water is coming down the canal. However, this area here, you can see that the vast majority of boats are still in their docks, and you can barely find any extensive damage in the Port of the Isles structurally, since there were no major wind issues here. Perhaps some small disarray due to some minimal storm surge, but for the most part, you can see that there's not any disarray, and everything seems to be well built, and it seems like it held up pretty well. As we move northbound, the next inhabited place is Goodland, Florida, which is just outside of Marco Island, and this was the first area in Southwest Florida to see considerable damages. You can see here that this marina, the boats were displaced in all directions, and many of the boats can actually be seen up against the islands in complete disarray, some of the boats in the mangroves. This area here received a combination of mild winds and storm surge that was catastrophic. Most of the homes here suffered damages from storm surge and also from wind, so Goodland would have been the first place heading along the south coast of Florida to see considerable damages. Right next to Goodland is Marco Island. This is just south of Naples. Marco Island was the first place in Southwest Florida to experience hurricane force winds. Most of Marco Island has a considerably high elevation, and while Marco Island did experience storm surge, you can see here on the southern tip of the island that many of the condominiums, the sand was washed up all the way to the road. However, Marco Island is very well put together with strong building code regulations, and despite the fact that the southern end of the island had damages from storm surge, the vast majority of Marco Island suffered very little damages. Some of the lower points in the island did have storm surge. However, the vast majority of Marco Island has a fairly good elevation. Wind damages were minimal, and keep in mind that Hurricane Irma made landfall near Marco Island, and that for the most part, most of the homes on Marco Island have a decent building code elevation. There's a lot of new homes. While there were some sporadic damages from the storm surge throughout the island, for the most part, most of Marco Island is structurally together. The vast majority of Marco Island did very well. Here we can see the Snook Inn, which is a famous restaurant, and you can see extensive damage here. Like I said, most of Marco Island fared very well, but there were definitely boat docks all throughout the island that were exposed during the storm surge, and these areas had lost boats and other damage to marinas. But for the most part, Marco Island fared very well, other than these most exposed areas. Just to the north of Marco Island is the Isles of Capri. The Isles of Capri suffered extensive storm surge damage. Many of the buildings along the coast were completely destroyed due to the storm surge, and a vast majority, if not most properties on Isles of Capri had water about to the windows. When you enter Naples, the situation becomes a little bit more distressful. We're looking at the southern tip of Goodland Pass. This is Port Royal, properties into the dozens of millions. You can see that the properties here suffered extensive storm surge damage, with much of the beach even washing away. Some of these properties are in upwards of $40 million, and this area suffered greatly. As you can see, the sand on Gulf Shore Boulevard was washed several blocks inland. That means that not only did water enter into the city streets, but also sand and other debris. The historic Naples fishing pier was destroyed. You can see here that the end of the pier is completely gone. The middle of the pier is where the boardwalk ends, and sand has been washed all the way to the parking areas. That means that most of Naples along the coast suffered considerable storm surge damages, and historic buildings like the Naples Pier were damaged. Surprisingly, some of the marinas in Naples along the Gordon River sustained minimal damage, despite the fact that there were definitely places like this marina here where you can see boats piled up. A lot of the areas along the Gordon River and the bayfront of Naples, which did have storm surge that went into all of these roads, still damages were minimal. Many areas along Gulf Shore Boulevard moving into North Naples had considerable damages, with many boats landing on the road and many vehicles landing on the water. Here in this image, you can clearly see that the marinas along Gulf Shore Boulevard were damaged along Park Shore and Gulf Shore Drive, and many of the high-rises and parking garages here also suffered damage, with many boats landing directly on the land and many cars landing directly on the water. This area along Gulf Shore Boulevard, north of Naples, suffered very serious damages, and in some places, pure garbage piled up at the end of the marinas and at the end of the canals. In this area here, wind damage was still not a major factor. This area suffered mostly from storm surge. You can see many vehicles spread out as they were just dragged. In this particular image, you can see many vehicles scattered along the road, and it is a clear fact that along Gulf Shore Boulevard, many vehicles floated into the water. Towards Naples Park and Vanderbilt Beach, the Naples Ritz-Carlton, you can see a chaotic scene of vehicles scattered in all directions, and you can tell that the storm surge here was also dramatic. Please note as well a line of debris along the coast. This particular area along Vanderbilt Beach suffered incredible storm surge, and you can see that the boat docks were damaged. You can see there's vehicles scattered in all directions, as is here, where you can see several vehicles that were scattered. There was also boats that were lodged outside of the buildings and landed in areas. Like right here, you can see a boat that was literally on top of a house. This area along Naples Park had considerable storm surge, and not only were vehicles thrown into the water, but many boats ended up on land. Along Naples Park, Gulf Shore Drive had extensive damages as well. The area along La Playa and other areas heading back towards Delnor Wiggins, you can clearly see an abnormal amount of destruction, with boats on land, cars in the water, sand on the roads. In this area along Gulf Shore Drive, you can say that was completely destroyed, with vehicles, boats, all mangled up in an incredible mess. When you get to about where the entrance to Delnor Wiggins Pass is, you can see that the damages here were extensive, with vehicles and boats scattered in all directions. The storm surge here, right outside of Naples Park, was absolutely catastrophic. You can see the madness of vehicles scattered and boats, both vehicles on the water and boats on land. The destruction along Naples Park is horrendous. It's completely gone, and what was once Delnor Wiggins State Park today resembles more of a completely unknown disaster zone. You can see how the sand pushed all the way up to the structures, and we can say that this state park of Wiggins Pass will never be the same again. Wiggins Pass, you can see Barefoot Beach on the north side. The area did not sustain any major changes, and you can see that for most part it looks all about the same. However, by the time you enter the Wiggins Pass Marina, you can tell that there were damages. As you can see here, there were boats on top of the road in this direction. Several boats were lodged also here. Many boats have sank, and you can tell that the Wiggins Pass area had considerable damages from the boat marinas. As well, in this back corner here, you can see many boats were scattered. Even as far as beyond the mangrove line, you can see boats back towards the buildings and cars that have floated away. You can also start to see wind damage for the first time, and we can assume that Wiggins Pass was likely the first place to have considerable wind damage, as you can tell by the roof of this building here that has roof damage. You can see that most of the boats along the Wiggins Pass Marina are piled up on top of each other and destroyed, and the storm surge continued to work its way even further into Wiggins Pass. You can see here as well, there's boats scattered in all directions, and ironically, there's even a boat that made it all the way to Wiggins Pass Road, about half a mile inland. So the destruction along Wiggins Pass was absolutely catastrophic. And you can see here that there's boats scattered. Well, it's just pretty much anywhere behind Wiggins Pass. You can also see that the storm surge made catastrophic damages to properties off of these streets here, off of Pan Am Avenue. Barefoot Beach, right on the northern end of Collier County, is unrecognizable. You can see that the properties along the coast here, marinas, have all been destroyed, vehicles scattered, boats on land, vehicles in the water, and the wind and the storm surge damaged this area, causing boats to end up on land and entire structures showing damages. We can say that Barefoot Beach will never be the same again, and many of the homes here, some stretching into the tens of millions of dollars, you can see that the sand washed up pretty far in. This area of Barefoot Beach suffered incredible damages. When you enter Lee County into Bonita Springs, you can see boats and docks spread out through the backwaters. Bonita Springs and the Imperial River waterways had incredible storm surge, and there are boats, houses, and all types of debris scattered all through this area in a catastrophic manner. You can see this marina here, many boats were damaged. The utter destruction continues into Bonita Beach, where you can see Bonita Beach where the curve is on Hickory Boulevard. The sand made it all the way to these houses here. Boats on land, vehicles in the water, sand on the road. Hickory Boulevard and Bonita Springs, complete destruction on a catastrophic level. And in many areas along the backway, debris and boats, anything that could have floated, made its way into the mangroves. And you'll start to see many areas like this where large collections of debris have piled up along the mangroves. In fact, one of the most terrifying sights is here in Bonita Springs, where you can see a huge collection of boats, debris, and vehicles. And in this debris that you see here, many search efforts are being done to find not just material possessions, but also some of the most tragic finds you could imagine. Imagine the searching for human life in this area here, where boats, vehicles, and anything that could have floated was just jammed up into these mangroves. The search efforts continue in this area, many of them with very sad results. The situation along Bonita Beach is catastrophic. The destruction continues into Big Hickory Pass, where you can see more of the same. The storm surge combined with the wind threw boats into the mangroves, cars into the water, and washed sand away. Big Hickory Pass seems like it opened up a lot more and perhaps could be a little bit deeper and wider than it was in the past. Along New Pass, you can see that new passes have actually been created, and perhaps places along here have lost a considerable amount of shoreline. Lover's Key State Park shows some visible changes. It looks like the fishing pier made it. One of the craziest things I have seen during this hurricane is what you're looking at right here. This is where the big giant hut used to be on Lover's Key State Park. The hut is completely gone, and a new pass can be seen over the bridge. I'm going to assume that this bridge will no longer be used structurally. It's probably no longer structurally sound. And the fact that, well, the giant hut is gone and a new hut has been placed here goes to show that now the island of Lover Key has been split in several places. The other bridge that was being fixed is completely gone, and the one bridge closest is still in place. One could assume that with this situation, Lover's Key State Park and the areas that were accessible before the storm will likely be out of commission for a very long time. You can also see that on the north end by Big Carlos Pass, a large chunk of land was lost. The destruction continues into Fort Myers Beach, where you can clearly denote absolute destruction of the entire island. And in fact, in some places, water in places where it wasn't before. Most of Estero Island, Fort Myers Beach, will never be the same. The destruction on Fort Myers Beach is catastrophic, and many of the buildings have been completely annihilated, eliminated, never to be seen again. As you can see here, garbage is piled up, and you can imagine the efforts to search for anything that was human here is going to be very complicated. Just look at this tangled mess of boats, plywood, and homes, and as well, perhaps people that decided not to listen to the evacuation orders. Perhaps the magnitude of this situation can illustrate to you that this will never be the same, and all these areas and all these debris piles are going to have to be searched extensively for signs of anything. You can see that on the other far side, also even deep in the mangroves, there are boats, debris, plywood, and who knows what else. To search an area this extensive, and these are mangroves, these are not readily accessible areas, it will be a very complicated effort to search these mangroves. As you can see, entire boats and boats with docks and docks with boats all together. Estero Bay has been littered in a way that has never happened before in the past. You can see entire mangrove islands completely covered in debris. Imagine the search efforts in these areas for other things. You can imagine. Just imagine. Clearly, you can see many of the things that were washed away from Fort Myers Beach back up on this mangrove on the north side of Matanzas Pass. You can see boats scattered in all directions, possibly 12 to 18 feet tall, which means that these boats had to be above that level. The search efforts in this area are going to be extremely difficult. As you can see that there are boats and possibly houses and whatever was in those houses scattered. The absolute most horrendous destruction and pretty much just horrific sights that you can imagine are what's left over in these mangroves outside of Fort Myers Beach. Needless to say, the situation in Fort Myers Beach is without words. And we know that even the main area is destroyed and entire buildings are gone. It's difficult to even comprehend the amount of destruction. You can see here this entire area as well, completely destroyed. These boats were actually over here on the other side, and this area here, we actually did videos here. The destruction along Fort Myers Beach, you can't even tell where the boats were. It's a tangled mess of houses, mobile homes, boats, businesses, barges. The destruction along San Carlos here, just north of Fort Myers Beach, is incredible. And we actually did videos a week before all this happened. So if you want to see what this area looked like a week before, we actually did videos here 1 week before. It's on our channel. Never imagined that it would look like this, but the destruction in Fort Myers Beach is without comparison. As we know, the Sanibel Causeway, I believe, was one of the causeways that was damaged, if not outright just eliminated. As you can see here, the Sanibel Causeway, another area where we did videos recently, it was just washed away, entire sections of road gone. We've done several videos on the Sanibel Causeway. Some of these videos were actually right before, like a month before the hurricane. We did a live stream here, and it's gone now. There's nothing left. So the Sanibel Causeway, we know, had those damages. And just like the island of Fort Myers Beach suffered incredible damage as well, the island of Sanibel suffered the same fate as Fort Myers Beach. Perhaps not on the same level, but you can still see that the vast majority of Sanibel is in bad condition. I will say that perhaps maybe Fort Myers Beach did a little bit worse than Sanibel. Like, it seems like Sanibel has less structural damage by percentage. Like you can see in here, the golf courses are lakes and stuff, but at least structurally, there looks like there's more left in Sanibel. But even from satellite images, you can tell that Sanibel took a huge hit. And again, there are those kind of new passes that are created. But looks like Sanibel suffered some great damages. Even the lighthouse, you can see the shadow of the lighthouse here. The buildings that were next to the lighthouse in Sanibel are gone. But it looks like for the most part, Sanibel didn't fare as badly as most of Fort Myers Beach. Let's take a look further down where the Sanibel Captiva area is. And you can see the road got washed away, buildings destroyed. So Sanibel also had extensive damages. But it is possible that Sanibel may have had just a little bit less damage than Fort Myers Beach. You can tell here, looks like some of these houses, despite the fact you can tell the storm surge came through here, it doesn't seem like the structural damage on Sanibel is as bad as it was in Fort Myers Beach. So it's possible that Sanibel, despite having massive damages, fared better than Fort Myers Beach. And when you move up to the island of Captiva, you can definitely tell that the boat docks are damaged and that there was storm surge, but it looks like there's more structural integrity on Captiva and Sanibel than on Fort Myers Beach. Definitely not the chaotic mess of Fort Myers Beach. So it is possible that maybe some parts of Captiva fared a lot better, but regardless, there's still sand on the ground, boats on the land, and I'm sure many vehicles in the water. It is still a horrible sight, but perhaps not as bad as Fort Myers Beach. Looking at St. James City on Pine Island, you can see that there was definitely wind and storm surge damages here, with some parts of the southern tip of the island being completely destroyed. You can actually see structural damage on roofs. So clearly, the southern tip of St. James City not only had storm surge, but also clearly there was strong wind damage as well. So St. James City, however, you can still see that some of the mobile homes made it. So it looks like perhaps on Pine Island, you can see a mobile home here with the roof missing, and you can see the trusses to the ceiling. So it is possible that many of the mobile home parks made it. Not every single mobile home on St. James made it, but it looks like if it was storm surged complete wall like in Fort Myers Beach, these mobile homes would have not made it. But you can see these houses here had extensive roof damage. So it looks like St. James City had a lot of wind damage. Perhaps wind did more damage than storm surge in St. James City. You can see these mobile homes here all having extensive, if not complete, damage. And you can clearly denote the difference between storm surge damage and wind. It seems like wind was definitely a huge factor on St. James City. However, many of these mobile homes may have actually made it. You can tell here that wind damage was considerable in Pine Island by the fact that most of these houses are missing roof. Some houses even completely losing their roof, like this one. You can see it over here in the woods. So wind was definitely a huge factor on the southern tip of Pine Island. As we look further into Lee County, we can see that most of Cape Coral is structurally sound. You can see a few boats that landed on land, but structurally Cape Coral is sound. Despite what some people have said, a few of the exposed boat docks further to the south did have damages. You can definitely see damage in Cape Coral, but it is not absolute destruction. Every once in a while you'll see an older house where they lost the fence. You can clearly denote damages in Cape Coral, but it does not seem to be of a massive catastrophic level. What is an utter destruction and mess is surprisingly downtown Fort Myers. Even though downtown Fort Myers is very far up the Caloosahatchee River, a huge destruction took place along downtown Fort Myers as the storm surge crashed into downtown Fort Myers, sending boats into downtown Fort Myers, and a large percentage of Fort Myers was actually underwater from storm surge. So downtown Fort Myers took a huge hit, and you can see boats, very large boats, landed on land in downtown Fort Myers. You can also see that along the Caloosahatchee River, boat docks are missing, storm surge damage, and wind damage. The southern tip of Fort Myers had some noticeable damages. The storm surge in Fort Myers made it surprisingly all the way to US 41 in South Fort Myers, and by you can tell clearly in this parking lot the disarray of vehicles, the storm surge actually made it quite far inland, causing a lot of destruction to some areas along Gladiolus and as far as US 41. In fact, the night of the hurricane, we could see vehicles, debris, mobile home, boats, just complete utter destruction, both wind and storm surge that made it all the way to US 41. In fact, you can see a pileup of vehicles along US 41 where the storm surge made it as far as Tamiami Trail in the southern tip of Fort Myers, along Henry Creek. Very interesting how the storm surge was able to find its way that far inland. If you zoom out, you can see it's quite a distance inland, but the storm surge actually found its way that far in. Towards Boca Grande, this is almost to Charlotte County, the last island of Lee County. Access was blocked to enter. Now you can see that the main road was flooded. In fact, you can see here a vehicle going on flooded roads. You can see extensive wind and flooding damage along most of Boca Grande. Many of the buildings along Boca Grande had roof damage, and it looks like wind damage may have been the larger cause of concern for Boca Grande. You would see piles of debris along the mangroves if they had a massive storm surge. So while they definitely could have had a moderate storm surge, It seems like Boca Grande suffered mostly from large wind damages. You can see homes here that are disfigured, and wind damage appears to be the largest problem that they had on Boca Grande. Most of the island looks structurally sound. However, access to the island is still prohibited. And being a coastal area, you can imagine that they would still have to search the waterways. You can see lots of wind damage on Boca Grande Island, but most of the island seems to be structurally sound, and it doesn't look like storm surge was a major factor along Boca Grande. Looks like it fared well. However, if you look further off, you can see helicopters perhaps doing rescue work. That search efforts here are going to be very difficult, but you can definitely tell that there's stuff going on around the island, which would probably indicate why even to this day access is still not allowed back on this island. Definitely there'll be search efforts through here. On Bokelia, which is the northern end of Pine Island, you can see that there was massive erosion along the coast. Both docks split in half, and very visibly large wind damage. So the northern end of Bokelia clearly suffered massive wind damage, and it looks like the Bokelia fishing pier was destroyed. North Fort Myers suffered extensive wind damage. We're looking at the Suncoast Estates area, where you can see mobile homes in complete disarray. Many areas inland, just like this one here in North Fort Myers, suffered extensive wind damages. And you can see here that this community suffered greatly from wind. Alright guys, the last thing that I'm going to show you is the community of Portico, which is close to Lehigh Acres, Florida. You can see that the new roofs here far inland, very few of these roofs, if any, were damaged. It looks like they all made it perfectly. However, you can see that the fence is completely annihilated, and that most of the fence around Portico is a huge mess. Despite the fact that none of the homes had any real damage, the fence that goes all the way around Portico was completely destroyed. And I'm going to warn you that these beautiful white plastic fences are a pile of crap, and they have failed in a lot of places, leaving an utter mess destruction. As you can see here, it is quite the eyesore all the way around this community. Didn't seem like any of these houses really had structural damage to their new roofs, and this is usually the case for most communities inland. The only thing that's a utter mess is the destruction of the fences. And guys, I'm sure we could talk about these satellite images for days, but this is a preliminary idea of what happened in Southwest Florida. Most inland communities, as you can see here, suffered just about no visible damages.